Jesus came and lived as one of us, loving and teaching those around him, and he laid down his life on the cross and was buried. And of course we know Scripture records his resurrection and eventual ascension into heaven. But what was this all about? Why did God become a man? Why did the Word take up our flesh, our nature? Why did Jesus come to die? In this 7-part series, we review the 17 unique claims comprising penal substitutionary atonement, and we consider each claim in light of Scripture and the historic Church's teachings. Well, hello and welcome to Idol Killer, a ministry dedicated to destroying sacred cows for the cause of Christ. I'm your host, Warren McGrew, and you're joining us for the final episode in a 7-part series exploring the unique claims of penal substitutionary atonement. In the previous episodes, we've reviewed and considered claims 1 through 15, and in this episode, we're examining the claims surrounding the Old Testament sacrificial system, as well as this understanding of what it means for a ransom. And joining us in this is none other than Paul Vendredi. Paul, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me, Warren.
This has been a pleasure. It's been fun. It's been fascinating. It's been challenging. And I really am enjoying this. Thank you so much for agreeing to walk us through all of this. And as I said at the intro here, that we're going to be exploring this idea of Old Testament sacrificial systems and what it means to be a ransom. And so I think this episode is going to have some very unique content, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, Warren, we're taking on claims number 16 and 17 now. These are the final claims in the model of penal substitutionary atonement, PSA. So claim number 16 of PSA is a little bit long-winded. I'm actually going to have to read this one. It goes, as the perfect unblemished offering, Christ satisfies God's wrath against sin once and for all, thereby obviating any further need for blood sacrifice. Now, that's long-winded. Let me give that to you again. As the perfect unblemished offering, Christ satisfies God's wrath against sin once and for all, thereby obviating any further need for blood sacrifice. Because that is so long-winded, let's just do some shorthand here and say Christ fulfills the entirety of the Old Testament sacrificial system. I'm sure that's a claim you've heard, isn't it, Warren?
Repeatedly so, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, so our claim is Christ fulfills all the Old Testament sacrifices. This claim, Warren, is ubiquitous across all of Christianity. It is ubiquitously taught in Protestantism, whether you're talking about Reformed Protestants or non-Reformed Protestants. It is uniformly taught in Catholicism, whether you're talking about strict Augustinian Catholicism or moderate Augustinianism. And it's even becoming prevalent in Eastern Orthodoxy. For example, this book right here, the Orthodox Study Bible. If you look at the footnotes in chapters 9 and 10 of the book of Hebrews, it is corrupted straight through with this notion that Christ fulfills all of the Old Testament sacrificial system. So let's rewind a little and do a little bit of review. We said that penal substitutionary atonement, PSA, is a model comprising 17 claims, 17 ideas, 17 components. The first set of ideas is a set of anthropological ideas that come from Augustine of Hippo, towering figure of the late antique period and a doctor of the Catholic Church. On top of these anthropological claims, a medieval named Anselm posited 9 soteriological claims. So what you had with Anselm was a 12-point model that I call the medieval model of atonement. Many centuries after Anselm, there came a group of modern Protestants that I refer to as the Atonement School. The Atonement School posited 5 ideas that fleshed out the 12 original ideas of Anselm and Augustine. So you end up with a system that has 17 components. So the claim that we're looking at now, the idea that Christ fulfills the entirety of the Old Testament sacrificial system, was not found in the medieval model of atonement. It's something that the modern exponents of the atonement school teach. Now, I'm not saying it was unknown prior to them. I mentioned in a previous interview that Thomas Aquinas very briefly touches on this in the law section of the Summa Theologica. And he offers a surprisingly weak defense of this. And when you have the most brilliant exponent, the most brilliant mind of the late antique period, offering a weak argument, you know that there's got to be a problem with the claim. So, in all honesty, Warren, the claim is actually not that bright. PSA comprises 17 components. If you want to know whether a system is true or false, you can test it for systematic consistency. If it lacks systematic consistency, then it is a false system. And this claim that Christ fulfills the Old Testament sacrificial system in its entirety causes dysteleologies elsewhere in the system of PSA. Now, you will recall that Anselm of Canterbury told us in claim number 10 that the atonement has to mirror the fall and must be as painful as possible, since the fall was as easy as possible. Now, this is a problem, because if Christ represents all of those Old Testament animals who were offered in sacrifice, then what do we do with the Christian apologetic argument that the sacrifices are okay because the animals were all killed quickly? In the Old Testament, they slit the throat and they bled the animals. Christian apologists all say that this is a quick and painless death. If Christ represents those animals, then why was Christ not killed quickly and painlessly? Instead, Christ is killed by torture over a span of several hours. So we have a systematic dysteleology. We have a malfunction in the system. Claim number 16 also causes another malfunction in one of the atonement school's other claims. They claim that on the cross, Christ becomes a literal sin. He becomes a literal curse and the embodiment of sin.
Do you understand that the cross is the supreme circumcision? Because when Jesus takes the curse upon himself, so identifies with our sin that he becomes a curse, God cuts him off. And justly so, because at the moment that Christ takes upon himself the sin of the world, that figure that is on the cross is the most grotesque, most obscene mass of sin concentrated in the history of the world.
If Christ is a literal curse and the embodiment of sin, then how can he be the unblemished offering that atones for man's sins once and for all? Is he a perfect unblemished sin? Is he a perfect unblemished sacrifice? This is just absurd. This is a system, Warren, that lacks systematic consistency. That is a sure sign of its falsity. All right, so we've gone on and on for a couple of minutes here. What is the major proof text? The major proof text that usually gets thrown around for this is 1 Corinthians 5:7. The second part of that verse says, "For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us." Ah, says John MacArthur. Ah, says R.C. Sproul. You see, Christ is the Passover lamb. Therefore, he is the ultimate scapegoat on the ultimate Day of Atonement. Wrong day and wrong animal. Now, Warren, I'm going to address this one directly to you. If you ever wanted evidence that you should not waste your time and money going to seminary, you got it right here. All of these grandees of the Atonement School have the letters PhD behind their name. All of these grandees of the Atonement School went to the most elite seminaries and academies in North America. Yet they don't know that Passover is not Yom Kippur and that sheep are not goats. The Passover lamb is killed on the day of Passover. The scapegoat is actually released alive on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur in Hebrew. So they have the wrong day and they have the wrong animal. You know, Warren, when you're dealing with penal substitutionary atonement, you're dealing with some of the greatest minds in the history of the Christian church. You're dealing with Augustine of Hippo, doctor of the Catholic Church. You're dealing with Anselm of Canterbury, another doctor of the Catholic Church. To a lesser extent, you're dealing with Thomas Aquinas, another doctor of the Catholic Church. Then when you're dealing with the Atonement School, you're dealing with guys who are all PhDs and all highly educated. These are men who have read rooms full of books, yet they don't know that sheep and goats are different genera. So the way I like to put it is this. People like you and me, Warren, are rednecks with shooting irons going up against Godzilla.
You're sure a rip snorter when you get started. I always heard you was, and now I know it.
This is a massive tower of intellect that we are facing. But this is one place where we country folk have an advantage over these city-slicking seminary elites. I don't think these people have ever even been on a farm. You know, one of my earliest memories is being a little child getting chased around the farmyard by an angry goose. Have these people had these kind of experiences? You know, even right now, I know 4 people who raise goats. My friend Tara raises goats in the Phoenix area. My friend Robbie also raises goats in the Phoenix area. My friend Pamela raises goats up in Show Low, Arizona. And my friend Jason raises goats up in Michigan. When I ran into my friend Tara once, I said, "Hey, Tara, you know, there's this guy on the radio named R.C. Sproul, and he says that because Christ is the Lamb of God, he is therefore the scapegoat of the Old Testament." And she gave me this kind of cartoon double look, and she goes, "No one should be making that mistake." More recently, I spoke to my friend Pamela, who raises goats in Show Low. I said, "Hey, Pamela, you know, there's this guy who says on the radio that Christ is the scapegoat because he's the Lamb of God." She was a little bit more generous than Tara, and she goes, "Well, you know, these city people, they don't know anything about animals." So the whole thing is just a colossal disaster. So if they're wrong about Christ being the scapegoat, being all of the animals of the Old Testament, what is my position? My claim is that Christ fulfills the Passover lamb. He does not fulfill the sacrifices that are instituted after the golden calf incident of Exodus, the 32nd chapter. So, again, returning to the proof text, the second part of 1 Corinthians 5:7, "For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us." From that verse, we are justified to infer that the Passover represents Christ. We are not justified to infer anything else from that passage. It's that simple. All right, now I want to say I have introduced this as my claim. I'm saying it's my claim because as I mentioned at the top of the show, the vast majority of Christianity, even in Eastern Orthodoxy, says that Jesus fulfills all of those sacrifices. I want to point out why, I'm going to give my arguments why I say that that's wrong, and that Jesus is only represented by the pre-golden calf sacrifices, specifically the iconoclastic sacrifice of the Passover lamb. The first thing I want to point out is that the people who offered up the sacrifices are the Aaronic order. In order to offer a sacrifice, you had to be from the tribe of Levi, clan of Kohath, family of Aaron. If Jesus represents the animals that are offered by this family, don't you think he would be born in that family? In fact, he's not. He is not from the family of Aaron. He's not from the clan of Kohath. He's not even from the tribe of Levi. The book of Hebrews goes to great pains to tell us that Jesus is from what tribe? He's the Lion of what? He's the Lion of Judah. He's from the tribe of Judah. He's not from the tribe of Levi. If Jesus is all of these sacrificial animals, wouldn't God at least have him be born from the tribe that offers these animals up? But he's not. He's from an entirely different tribe. I mentioned earlier that the order that offers up the sacrifices is the Aaronic order. But the Bible says that Jesus is a priest after the order of what? Order of Melchizedek. Go back to the book of Genesis. What sacrifices did Melchizedek offer up? He offered up bread and wine. He did not offer up sheep, goats, oxen, doves, etc., etc. He offered up bread and wine. What sacrifice did Christ reinstitute at the Last Supper? The sacrifice of bread and wine. Now, whether this is a recapitulation of his actual sacrifice on Calvary is a matter of controversy. I'm not going to touch that one. Suffice it to say that he offers up the sacrifice that is offered up first by Melchizedek, and he is directly called a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Now, let me go back to this priesthood thing. Not only is Christ not born from the tribe of Levi, clan of Kohath, family of Aaron, he does not seem to have a very high regard for the priests who are offering up the sacrifices. In his era, the priestly order was occupied by a caste called the Sadducees. Jesus does not seem to have a very high regard for that caste at all. In Matthew, the 22nd chapter, these priests approach him and try to entrap him with the story of the girl who was married to the 7 brothers. Christ responds to them, "Ye do err, not knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God." Essentially, what Jesus just said to them is, you don't know diddly about the very Scriptures God entrusted to you, and, to use the Pentecostal term, you are devoid completely of anointing. This is what Jesus said to the priestly order of his day. So if Jesus is the animals offered up by these priests, shouldn't he have a high regard for them? Now, what about the place where these priests work? These priests worked in the temple of Herod in Jerusalem. So 2 chapters after that incident I just mentioned, Christ's disciples are in awe of the temple of Herod. And he says, do you see all of this? This is all going to come crashing down. So he predicts the destruction of the temple and altar in which those priests are offering their sacrifices. Does that sound like Jesus would say that if he was the fulfillment of the animals that they offer up in that temple? I don't think so.
It'd be a completely different sort of handling. He would be very careful to draw that distinction out, and you're right, it's just not there.
Yeah. Now, what does Jesus do when he's in the temple? According to the Synoptic Gospels, in the third year of his ministry, he cleanses the temple. He drives all of the animals and the money changers out. According to the Gospel of John, he does exactly the same thing in the first year of his ministry. And if you look at John chapter 2, verses 13 through 16, it says, "And Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the changers of money seated. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep, and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables, and said unto them that sold doves, Take these things hence, make not my Father's house an house of merchandise." Again, that's John chapter 2, verses 13 through 16. So that verse tells you specifically that he drives out the oxen, the sheep, and the doves. Those are the animals that are offered up in sacrifice in the temple. It also tells you he poured out the changers' money. Now that's important because at the time of Jesus, at the time Jesus was living, 1st century AD, there was already a Jewish diaspora. The Jews were spread all over the Near East by that time. So during the Passover festival, these Jews came back on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They were bringing with them money from all these various countries. They're bringing back coins from Egypt, coins from Greece, coins from Anatolia, coins from Mesopotamia. All of these coins contained images or had on them images of false gods. You cannot bring images of false gods into the temple. there had to be an exchange system, kind of like when you go to Chuck E. Cheese and you drop your quarter in and it gives you a token. They had to exchange these idolatrous coins for tokens that could actually be acceptable within the temple. And then they used that money, they used those tokens to buy the animals to offer in sacrifice. By the way, there had to be animals there too, because Jews are coming from all over the world. They can't just put a lamb on their shoulders and carry that all the way from Alexandria, Egypt. They can't drive a massive transhumance of oxen and sheep from Mesopotamia. They have to, for practical reasons, they have to buy the animals there, and they have to use the temple coins. Jesus has thrown all the money around, and he's driven off the animals. That means it is impossible to offer sacrifice in the temple. We talked before about the diatessaron, and we talked about other harmonizations of the four Gospels. Most harmonizations of the four Gospels tell you that Christ drove the animals out of the temple the first year of his ministry, that's in John, and he did it again in the third year of his ministry. That's the Synoptic Gospels. Now, my opinion is if he did it the first and third years, he probably also did it the second year of his ministry. That means for 3 straight years, he made it either impossible or extremely difficult to offer up sacrifices. Keep in mind, Jesus is supposed to be the fulfillment of this sacrifice system. So that means for 3 years, there quite possibly were no sacrifices going on. And this is before Jesus is crucified as allegedly the last of these sacrifices. Now, what happens every time the four Gospels depict Christ in the temple? Every single time he is in the temple, he's making some kind of disruption. When he's 12 years old, he's in the temple causing a disruption. He ditches his parents, and then he's quizzing the priests and the scholars of the law, probably about the sacrifices. At age 12, he's a little too small to manhandle these people, but he can humiliate them with his intellect. By the time he's a grown man, he's big enough to manhandle these people, and he drives them out on the temple on at least 2 occasions, probably on 3 occasions. So I want to know, if Jesus is these animals, why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? It makes no sense.
The claim would be that if he's the fulfillment of this, then that's why he put it into it. But he wouldn't have put it into it years in advance, because that system would still be legitimized if that's his fulfilling of it. And so there's some conflict even within that claim. So it doesn't make any real rational sense that I can see that he would be the fulfillment and he would stop it years in advance. That just does not follow. And if God can't forgive unless he has been paid with an animal sacrifice, if God can't forgive, then what would happen to those people that made that pilgrimage there for the atonement of their sins for 3 years running? It causes significant problems with their ability to actually offer sacrifice. And so there's a lot that goes into that. There is a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, and I need to reiterate, too, that I believe the evidence I presented dispenses with the argument. But what I'm presenting is a minority position. It's not without precedent. I mentioned in a previous interview, you can find this in the Apostolic Constitutions and the Didascalia Apostolorum. So there is precedent for it, but it is an extreme minority position. But because something is a minority position does not mean that it's false.
No, popularity, historicity, these things help, but in no means are they the determiner of truth. And regrettably, there's a tendency within Christian circles to just accept whatever the mainstream most popular view is, regardless of whether or not it's been considered on its merits. I appreciate that disclaimer, though.
Warren, let's move on to the final claim in the 17-component model of PSA, which is the idea that Jesus ransoms us from the wrath of God. I think
that's the big one. That's the big one.
Yeah, this one is colossal. I think that the Atonement School has a better case here than they had in the previous claim. This one actually, in the Atonement School is echoing Anselm, their forebear, because Anselm said that the death of Christ is a ransom for God. The big proof text there is Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. Mark 10:45. Virtually the same wording appears in the parallel passage in Matthew 20:28. And you also have the word ransom appear in 1 Timothy 2:5-6, which reads, For there is one God, and there is one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself a ransom for all. The word ransom there in the Greek is litron. The word litron is used in Mark 10:45 and Matthew 20:28. The word that's translated as ransom in 1 Timothy 2:5-6 is andilitron. That's a compound word, but you can hear the word litron in it. So the translations of the Bible we have render those three passages with the word ransom. When I was first approaching the topic of the atonement many, many years ago, I said to myself, all right, now, the Atonement School has already screwed up the phrase "ephopandes imarton" when they made claim number 1 for original sin, and when they were talking about propitiation, they screwed up the translation of "ilasthirion" and "ilasmos." So I thought to myself, in all likelihood, they've screwed up the translation of litron and andilitron. So what I did is I took my copy of the Novum Testamentum Graeci and I went down to the local Greek Orthodox parish. I opened the book up to Mark 10:45, and I approached a priest who had been born and raised in Greece. I put my finger under the word litron and I tapped my finger and I said, what does that word mean? He took a moment to look at the passage and he goes, oh, litron, that means payment or price. At that point, I asked what Perry Mason would have condemned as a leading question. I said, can it also mean ransom? He thought for a second and goes, yes, can also mean ransom. So I thought that maybe my boat was sunk. We're stuck with the word ransom. And what does the word ransom mean? Ransom means to liberate a hostage by paying the hostage taker some kind of payment. So liberation by payment of a price. That's what the dictionary tells us ransom means. That has all kinds of resonances for us in our modern era. When we hear ransom, we have resonances from these suspense movies where the child's been kidnapped and the parents have to drop off $100,000 in unmarked bills to secure the rescue of the child. So is this what we're dealing with in the New Testament? After all, these passages say that Jesus is a ransom. Ransom means liberation by payment of a price. But who is the ransom paid to? If you look at those three passages, and if you look at passages that use similar constructions in the New Testament, it never tells you who the hostage taker is. Who the hostage taker is a matter of speculation. Even the church fathers were not agreed on this. You have a choice. The ransom could be paid, as I say, to death, devil, or deity. It can be a ransom to Satan. It can be a ransom to death, hypostatization of an abstraction, or it can be a ransom to God. Ransom to God is what the modern atonement school says, following the example of Anselm. But as I said, even the church fathers were not agreed on this. Basil of Caesarea, a great father of the 4th century, said that it was a ransom to death. And that's what it says in the liturgy that's attributed to him. Basil had a brother named Gregory of Nyssa. I know you like his theology. Gregory of Nyssa said the ransom was paid to Satan. Another 4th century father named Cyril of Jerusalem said it was a ransom to God. So he was saying it was a ransom to God before Anselm did. But then there's another church father we've named before, Gregory of Nazianzus. Gregory of Nazianzus is the guiding star for the restored icon model. He said it's none of the above. I think you can guess which one I agree with.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Gregory of Nazianzus. It's none of the above. The word ransom, litron or andilitron, is not being used in the lexical sense. It is being used in a stipulative sense to mean rescue. Here's how I know that. In Exodus 6:6, we have the following exchange between God and Moses. God says, "Wherefore say unto the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out from under their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched out arm and with great judgments." That's Exodus 6:6. So God says that he will redeem Israel from Egypt. The word redeem there in the Septuagint is the Greek word litrosome. That is the verbal form of the word litron. Okay, litron would mean a ransom. Litrosome would mean to ransom. So essentially, if you're using the Septuagint, you could render Exodus 6:6, I will ransom you with a stretched out arm and with great judgments. Okay, the lexical definition of ransom is to liberate a hostage by paying the hostage taker some price. Did God pay Egypt to liberate Israel? No. In fact, the Egyptians paid the Israelites to leave. That's how anxious they were to get rid of them after the 10th plague. So obviously, the word litron should rightly be translated as rescue. So if you look at...
You'll note when you pointed that out, when God rescued the Hebrews from Egypt, they didn't walk away less as a result of that whole experience. They walked away further blessed as a result of that experience. It wasn't as though God was paying Egypt, but I want to highlight that point that they left with the wealth of Egypt.
That's right. In fact, God even supernaturally blessed the wealth because part of the wealth was clothing, and that clothing lasted them for 40 years in the desert. So that's what I have to say with ransom. And at that point, Warren, we have gone through all 17 claims, and with the exception of claim number 8, with which I sort of agreed, I think we have refuted all of them.
It's been a fascinating study. There's been a lot presented here that is very interesting. It's challenging, and one of the things I want to make a note of: we're not coming at this because we're a bunch of progressive liberal Christians that just have a problem with the truth of Scripture. We're not a bunch of weak-willed, sin-promoting. We want some sort of licentious lifestyle, and we want to be able to just go in and do whatever we want. That's not the motivation here. What we're looking at are the unique claims of this doctrine. We're looking at them in light of what Scripture says. We're looking at them in light of what the early church says. And then we're pointing out there is some significant problems here. And if we want to be consistent and try to be as close to the teachings of Christ as we can, as close to the teachings of the apostles and of Scripture, we're going to have to answer some tough questions here. So I think this has been very challenging, and I'm looking forward to hearing back some feedback from those that are watching and will watch this. But I really do appreciate you taking the time. I know this has been a big commitment from you. Yes, let's look at the Epistle of Diognetus. You held that up. That is a second century manuscript. Some scholars will say it was a little bit earlier than that. But I know that there have been defenders of penal substitutionary atonement that have quoted from this and have been adamant that this is teaching these 17 unique claims of penal substitutionary atonement. And before I tackle what it says in chapter 9, could you read from us that section in chapter 7? I just want the audience to be able to hear what the Epistle of Diognetus says in context.
Warren, we may have different translations of that because the word ransom in mine appears in section 8. Is that the section you wanted me to read? You wanted me to read that?
Yeah.
Ransom?
I'm sorry. There was a preceding instant there where it sets the stage for 9. I may have
All right.
misspoke.
All right. So in the section called "The Mystery of the Incarnation," the author of this writes, quote, "He took our sins upon himself and gave his own Son as a ransom for us, the holy for the wicked, the sinless for sinners, the just for the unjust, the incorrupt for the corrupt, the immortal for the mortal." That's the end of the passage.
And if you're reading this and you see the term ransom, and you've been indoctrinated into penal substitutionary atonement, and you see an exchange, then you're thinking, oh, here's Jesus taking the wrath of God intended for me. But what we see, I think, instead is like we would say, would you take a bullet for me? Would you jump in and rescue me from harm's way? And so I think if we look at this in context, we actually can see, as you were noting, that this is dealing more with a rescue mission. This is him coming to save us, precipitated by his mercy, not by his wrath, not by his judgment, but by his love and kindness.
Right. Warren, anytime you run into a word, you have to ask yourself, what are the resonances that the readers of that time would have had when they read that word? When we moderns read the word ransom, we think suspense movie. We think of child who's been kidnapped and dropping off the unmarked bills. That's probably not the resonances they had in the 2nd century. In the 2nd century, we're talking about people in the Eastern Church who spoke Greek as their native language. These are people who would have been very familiar with the Septuagint. And as we pointed out in Exodus 6:6, the story of God saying he's going to liberate Israel from Egypt, the word ransom appears there. God obviously didn't have to pay off the Egyptians to get them back. Thus, the most likely resonance that people reading this work in that century would have had is that this means God is going to rescue them. Let me point to some other things. I read this book, this Epistle to Diognetus. I read it 21 years ago sitting in the lobby of a Holiday Inn in Manama, Bahrain. I forgot all about it, and you reminded me of it yesterday. I pulled it off my shelf, and I see even 21 years ago I had underlined the word ransom. So even back then I was thinking about this stuff. But let me look at some other passages in here that simply do not make the case that the Atonement School wants to say this is making. For example, in section 7, the writer says this about Jesus, or says this about God the Father, quote, "It was in love, not in judgment, that he sent him," end quote. You remember what we said about John 3:16 and propitiation? God does not need propitiating if he's already well disposed toward us. If he's already well disposed to us in the Epistle to Diognetus, then when the Epistle to Diognetus talks about ransom, it's not talking about liberation by payment of a price. It's talking about rescue. End of story.
Boom. There it is, folks. The Epistle of Diognetus is not, as some have said, talking about penal substitutionary atonement. It's talking about a rescue mission. And we see that is the whole story of Scripture is that God is coming to save, redeem, and restore his people, that he's always been willing to forgive. Isaiah 55:7, one of my favorite verses in the Old Testament. "Let the wicked forsake his wicked ways, the unrighteous man his unrighteous thoughts, and let them return to me, and I'll freely pardon them." God desires mercy more than judgment, mercy more than wrath. And he is just to forgive. And when he forgives, he is good and loving and takes on the role of being the justifier of those he's forgiven. So we see this beautiful story in the work of God in Christ, from the incarnation, his ministry, his suffering, his death, his resurrection. All of that is a beautiful testament to the love of God and the depth that he will go to restore and redeem his image bearers, the children that he created to love and be loved by.
Hallelujah.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Paul. Is there any other parting words that we need to leave the audience with?
I think that we have offered a pretty clear case that penal substitutionary atonement is false. And we've offered that case largely from the Bible. We've only used church fathers as a backup for our particular spin on certain Bible passages. The question that I want to leave with people is, if you believe that God has to whack his own son before he can be freed up in love to forgive us, do you really want to worship that God? Is that a God who's worthy of worship? And Warren, I'll leave it at that.
Some thought-provoking commentary there. Yeah. And this is something that every viewer is going to have to dig into. Take responsibility for your own beliefs. Take responsibility for your own thinking. Take responsibility for your own walk in following God. And ask yourselves, are these 17 points really how Scripture is revealing the work and character of God? Or, perhaps the information that we've presented here will lead you to see that God is far better and you need him far more than you ever thought. So until next time, Paul, thank you so much for joining me, sir. I appreciate you. It's been a pleasure. And everyone watching, we love you. Thanks for tuning in, and God bless.